Express fans, we are back with another episode. My name is Charles Simmons. Some folks call me Coach Simmons, Coach Charles, whatever you would like to call me is fine by me. But we have a huge slate in front of us between 4 top-ranked matchups, a couple unbeatens facing top ranks, and then Friday night kind of showcased what you can expect from today's matchups, with Virginia taking down a top 10 team in FSU and Arizona State holding business down at home with beating TCU. And to kind of go ahead and dive into the matchups that we've seen from Friday. Virginia, a team that a lot of people in my comments on social media were telling me very underrated. They're slept on. Everybody should have paid attention to them a little bit more. In which, hey, I'll say I didn't. I really thought a top 10 team in FSU who beat Bama should be able to go on the road and beat a Virginia team. I thought UVA was not that dominantly impressing to me on film. But, hey, the game told me differently. Virginia said, we're going to line up shot for shot. You give me your best shooter, I'm going to give you my best shooter. And we're just going to see who can outmatch you. And UVA absolutely did that. They said, I'm better than you in every facet. Each team had 3 turnovers. Both quarterbacks were putting the teams on their backs and trying to do what they can to win the game. Now, Castellato did have the help of Deuce Robertson, who had 147 and a touchdown. I mean, he had himself a game. I think that's the best game I've seen Deuce play all year long, and probably be the best game he's played for the rest of the season, because it's just how uneven that matchup was against the Virginia DBs. I think a lot of teams now on film are seeing what that FSU offense kind of looks like, and a lot of my worries came to fruition watching that game, because I rewatched that Bama tape, and to me, I think Tommy beat everybody with his running. And the running game of FSU is what really catapulted them to win that game. It was the passing aspect. What receivers are really going to break out and become the top tier passers or pass catchers, and Robertson definitely did that in this game. But that was one of my question marks. Who was going to finally break out and be that top tier pass catcher for Tommy? And I always thought it could be Deuce, and now you see it in the top matchup. It's certainly going to be him. But the way Virginia was able to watch film and realize, okay, this is what they do great offensively. Hone in on what they do great and make them a one-dimensional team. Force Tommy to beat them through the arm. Yeah, Tommy had a lot of yardage, but, I mean, that's about all you can say in his passing aspect. They blitzed him like a madman to keep him uncomfortable. He did have some times where he came out of the pocket, torched him with his legs. But for the most part, Virginia did what they had to do. James Taylor, I think his name is Taylor, for UVA, number 3, absolute dog. He put a shoulder on who I think was one of the best safeties in college football, with Earl Little Jr. Put a shoulder on him and said, I'm going to put that ball in the end zone. Unmatched. All in all, I think turnovers were a big problem for both teams, so I can't really, once again, say anything about turnovers. But I don't think this loss to Virginia is going to really tell what you get out of FSU, because I've said this a lot so far in the first couple weeks of season. I don't think you're going to get a clear look at the contenders for college football until very much later on in the season. I think a lot of the times we've been able to tell, okay, these 1 or 2 teams we're going to be buying in for a national championship, or these 3 or 4 teams. At this point, I don't even think you can say 3 or 4. I mean, when you look at the entirety of the top 10, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but there's no clear-cut number 1 team. There's no clear-cut group of 3 or 4 teams that, okay, they're going to the national championship game. But we're going to spotlight TCU versus Arizona State real quick. Another game that kept me up late. Go ahead and say it. Arizona State cannot score in the red zone. I think that's one of the biggest problems Arizona State's going to have. They had it early on in the season. I thought they could fix it with a little bit more time before Big 12 play came in. But the game revolves around, can Sam get the ball to Jordan? And that's kind of what the offense of ASU looks like. And that's going to be a very big problem. If you're a one-dimensional offense, and same facet that I said about FSU, if you're one-dimensional, you're going to be beat. They're going to be able to give you a run for your money and beat you at even if you think it's your best day. They got to find a third down back. I think they're starting to find it with Brown, number 3, their running back, who had over almost 30 touches, I think, on the day between running and catching the ball. He was a dog. I think they need to utilize that a little bit more, because when they lost Cam this past year to the draft, they lost that third down back. They lost that red zone threat that they had in the running game with Cam. And I think they need to find it again in order to relieve some pressure off of Sam. Sam's going to have to do a little bit more magic if that's not the case, because right now the defenses are finding out exactly when they're going to target Jordan, and they're trying their hardest to contain that Levitt and Tyson connection. From what I watched last night, they know exactly when they were throwing the ball to Tyson. And at the end of the day, you can only keep a star receiver like that in check for so long. Because to me, Tyson's one of the best, if not the best receiver this year. So you can only keep a star receiver in check for so long, especially with a Big 12 defense. I mean, all in all, I think TCU is probably one of the better Big 12 defenses, along with somebody one I thought was Utah, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later on when we cover Texas Tech. But when you look at the way Arizona State played, they're going to have to figure out how to not be so one-dimensional, how not to be so predictable. I think that was one of the failures on their part, is they were very predictable. You knew exactly when they were going to pass. You knew exactly when they were going to run. You knew exactly who they were going to target on what play. Even with their number 7 for Arizona State, they knew when he was getting the ball. They knew when Tyson was getting the ball. So Arizona State is going to have to figure out how to make their offense less predictable defensively. They're going to be what carries them. A lot of the reason why they went so far last year is because their defense stepped up in the Big 12, started making big plays, giving their offense the opportunity to score. And that's exactly what Arizona State's defense did last night. And their kicker let them down. They left 9 points on the board. It could have been a 26-24 ball game, not having to even get those last 2 scores because you're up by 2, forcing TCU to have to go score. And with the way your defense was playing, they weren't going to go score. So this game could have been pulled away a lot farther if their kicker just could have put 9 more points on the board. But I'll say Arizona State, my big takeaways from those 2 games is Florida State, they got to figure out how not to be so one-dimensional. I do think their defensive line needs to man up a little bit, especially going into ACC play with a lot of teams that love to run the ball. Arizona State, I think they just need to learn how to not be so predictable and improve that red zone facet of their offense. And they will more than likely be the Big 12 favorites, but I just cannot say it right now with full confidence. I want to see another Big 12 game, see if they fix those mistakes. Same thing with FSU. I'm not going to throw them out of the conversation for the ACC. I want to see if they can fix those mistakes real quick, because they got Miami next week. That's going to be a true tell-of-the-tape game, and I kind of want to see what those 2 teams shake up after this week when they fix those mistakes. After next week, I'll start laying out who I think is going to be winning all the conference titles. So before we get into the game day picks, there's a couple games, because, every week I choose my sleeper matchup of the day, and it was really hard this week. You had Washington versus Ohio State. You had Auburn versus A&M. You had Tennessee going on the road to Mississippi State. All 3 of those games I think are very upset potential. I think a home game for Washington against Ohio State is not a clear-cut win for Ohio State. Auburn going on the road to A&M. A&M's offense is highly explosive. A&M's going to bring the firepower. I think if Auburn could have won last week's game against Oklahoma, it would have been a different tell of the game. I would have probably looked at this game a little bit differently. But I think with Reed, especially with Carver at receiver, I think there's going to be just too much that A&M brings to the table offensively. I think Auburn's defense is going to do a little bit to keep them in check, but I just don't think with a home game for A&M, they're going to be able to do enough to stop any explosiveness really from that A&M offense. When you look at Washington versus Ohio State and Mississippi State versus TCU, these are two games that I really, really wanted to put in my sleeper matchup because I really do think Washington has the opportunity to beat Ohio State. I think they do bring enough offensively. I would like to see what their team actually looks like because I don't think they've faced a quality offense so far. I don't think that defense for Washington has truly faced a quality offense. Ohio State will probably be the best offense they've faced up to this point. It's definitely going to be the best defense they faced up to this point. But I do like Coleman. I like what the Washington quarterback brings to the table. I think there's enough there to really start turning heads. Now, can they? Because there were holes. I don't think that defense was as sound as a lot of people make them out to be, especially early in the season when that big win over Texas, just because of how sloppy Texas offense looked. So I think Washington has a true opportunity, but I'm not just going to roll with Washington. It's just, in my gut, I don't feel comfortable with it, and I'm going to roll with the Buckeyes. Kind of the same situation with Mississippi State. I think the telling is great. I think the story would be amazing. I think they do have an opportunity, being that it is a home game for Mississippi State in Starkville. But being a Georgia fan, watching that Tennessee game, Tennessee's going to score points. And I don't really think there's a defense won in the SEC. And see, if Arizona State would have won their game more handily against TCU, I can probably sit there and say, okay, Mississippi State, they're going to be able to keep that offense in check a little bit. But as I mentioned earlier with Arizona State, that offense is very one-dimensional, or not one-dimensional, but it's very predictable. They struggled in the run game. Tennessee's offense is not like that. They're going to score the ball. They're going to score it either by a 40-yard play, 50-yard play, 30-yard play, or in the red zone. Tennessee's going to score. They probably have the best receiver, quarterback, running back duo or trio in the SEC. I like all three guys. Tennessee's going to come to play. They lost to Georgia. They're going to want to come with all their firepower on hand. So I'm not going to go away from Tennessee winning this game. But I don't think none of these games are going to be pull-aways. I don't think Ohio State's going to win by 30 or Tennessee's going to win by 40 or 25. I don't really see it being a 3-touchdown win for any team today that's facing a top 10 besides maybe A&M and Auburn. These are all going to be 14-point games, 10-point. I would even say Washington versus Ohio State might just be a 1-point game at the end of the day. Now, you also have Arkansas versus Notre Dame. I think this is a really test maker for Notre Dame going against a very explosive offense. We've seen that the Irish's defense looked very bad compared to last year. This is something that's very disappointing to me as a person that really bought into the Notre Dame defense. I thought coming into the year that they didn't lose a whole lot. You know what I'm saying? They kept a lot of their defensive players from last year. I thought they would be able to do a little bit more against Arkansas. Or not against Arkansas, but against other teams they faced so far. But A&M lit them up. You had Purdue drop 30 on them, which I didn't expect Purdue to be able to drop 30. I think that's really what made me realize coming into this week that defense it's the kryptonite. I think Arkansas can score points. I think this is truly Arkansas's opportunity to turn their season around because they've lost 2 games back-to-back, especially against a team we're going to talk about with Ole Miss with a late fumble, and they late fumbled against Memphis. But the thing of it is, you lost to 2 teams that more than likely could be in the college football playoffs. Very definitely could be in their conference championship game. So even as a 2-loss team, if you can turn it around now, your season is still alive. Notre Dame, on the other hand, you have no choice but to turn it around now. Arkansas can lose one more game and still be buying in for a conference championship game because Notre Dame's not a conference game. But Notre Dame right now has to win this game or their season's completely done. And that one's for me. It's a toss up on who I really want to take. USC versus Illinois. I don't think this is truly a toss up whatsoever. I think Illinois showed its true colors. Even if they do try to come to the table a little bit more with a little more aggression, they're hurt. There's injuries across the board for Illinois. USC's offense has looked spectacular. It's a Lincoln Riley offense. There's not much more you could really say about it. But this is the best defense that Lincoln Riley has had at USC. Probably the best defense he's had his entire time coaching football. So I think USC honestly wins this game by 3 scores. I don't think it's going to be a very close game at all. And Ole Miss versus LSU. I just mentioned earlier how Ole Miss won that game against Arkansas to a late fumble. And their defense has been a real sloppy. It's been up and down. And they've been very dominant. And then they've been looking like you can score on them at any point you want. LSU's offense has looked very bad. I'm trying to keep things kind of PG. But LSU's offense has not looked the best. I think defensively they're come to play. I don't know what happened, why they flipped the script. I don't know why it's now LSU defense playing good and their offense playing bad when the past couple years it's been defense playing bad, offense playing good. I don't know how you flip the script like that, but LSU's found out exactly how to flip the script. And I think in order for LSU to beat Ole Miss today, they're going to have to score. And there's no doubt about it. This is in LSU's hands. If the game's going to be won, it's going to be won by if LSU can score points. If Ole Miss can just drop more points than LSU, the game is theirs. So, key facet is Ole Miss is going to have to outpace LSU, and LSU is going to have to find a way to score. Now, that leaves me down to my 3 picks, my game day picks of the day. Starting off with Oregon versus Penn State. When I look at Oregon, I see a highly explosive team, a team just like Ole Miss, just like Tennessee. They can score when they want to. There's not much you can do to stop them from scoring. Number 5, their quarterback, Moore, has looked amazing. I think he's probably been one of the best quarterbacks so far this season. And then they are going into a whiteout. That whiteout environment might be a little tricky for for Oregon. But, I don't know, Penn State just hasn't really showed any level of great offense. It's all been just lackluster. Struggle here, struggle there. Quarterback rating of a 3.8. That's worse than spiking the ball on every down. If Drew Rowley wants to spike every down, he would have a higher QBR. So, I don't know. There's just so many telltale signs that Penn State is going to lose this game. James Franklin cannot win big games. But something, I said it early on that if Penn State's going to do anything, they're going to have to win these matchup, marquee games, big matchup games. But I just don't see them stopping Oregon's offense. I truly don't. I don't think it's going to be a blowaway game, but I do think Oregon's going to be able to win this. I'm going Oregon in this game. And then for my sleeper matchup of the day, you got Arizona versus Iowa State. I was really liking Iowa State after they beat Kansas State. But the way KSU's been playing, they've looked really bad. And I think Iowa State hasn't looked that great on offense. So, you got an Arizona team who's already shown that they can put up points. They can really ride and beat. They've even beaten the same team that Iowa State has beaten. So, I think both teams are coming in with a lot of momentum for opportunity. I think this game's going to have to be put on Rico's shoulders a little bit because the way that running game has been looking for Iowa State has not looked the best. I think that's probably their biggest downside. That's something that if Kansas State could have won that game against Iowa State was they kept the running game in check. They made it turn into a Rico Beck game. And Rico struggled a lot until the fourth quarter. If Arizona State could do a very similar thing, which I think they can because, like I said, Iowa State's run game has been one of the worst run games so far I've seen in college football, Arizona State has a true opportunity to win this game. And that's why I'm going to ride with Arizona State. I think Arizona State has the tools offensively to score points. I think they have the tools defensively to keep that running game in check to make it a Rico Beck game. And I see Arizona coming out with a win in this one. And then Alabama versus Georgia. This is my game of the day. This is probably a lot of folks' game of the day. Now, for me, being a Georgia fan, it really hurts watching this game. 1-6 against Bama, lost last year against Bama, thought the tides were going to turn, being that there's no Nick Saban. Oh boy, was I wrong. We lost once again, 41-34. I'm afraid it's going to be another same game where we just cannot get over the Bama hump. Now, watching the film on Alabama, offensive line wise, I don't know how they lost to FSU. I think their offensive line is very solid. Now, their worst part of their offense is when they have to do pulls in the run game. When they do any kind of pull from the center, pull from the guard, they can't really do the pull game in the running aspect. I don't know why. It just looks sloppy. They're slow. They can't get to their blocks in time. And that's where their running game kind of breaks down. But when they just do straight up blocks, power block, they open up the inside run. They just sweep it to the outside by just blocking to the left or blocking to the right, doing the receivers, letting them come motion in for a block or motion a tight end in for a block, and power. Anywhere where they get the receivers and tight ends in motion when they block in the running game, that's when you start seeing that running game open up a little bit. When Ty Simpson uses his legs, that's when you see the running game open up a little bit. And defensively, I don't find their defensive line too impressive. I don't see all the hype that they've had on their defensive line. I can see why FSU had the field day that they had running all over them. Georgia's going to have to utilize that very thing. And I will say this, Alabama's going to probably try to hit us with something a little different. That's all cool. All I know is if we can run the ball the way teams have been able to run the ball on Alabama, if we can just have our linebackers step up, because that's how they've been able to beat you a lot of the times in the passing game, is they target those zones that the linebackers just cannot cover or have a trouble covering. We need, secondary-wise, keep Ryan Williams in check. Linebacker-wise, we do not need to allow underneath stuff to break open for 40, 20, 30-yard plays. I think Bernard's going to be a main factor in that. I think their tight ends are going to be a huge factor in that. I would say the biggest problems is not necessarily Ryan Williams. I think there's going to be a lot of circles on Ryan Williams because of what he did last year. But I think the big circle is going to be on Bernard. Jam Miller is back. That's another big circle. And that's probably a lot of the reason why the running game has looked the way it's looked. So those are the two guys that I will be circling in on, making sure those two guys are in check. I don't believe Ryan Williams is going to be able to do what Chris Braswell did against us in that Tennessee game. But the possibility is there. I'm not saying just let him free release off the line. But I will say the two guys I would circle in on for Georgia would be Bernard and Miller. For Georgia, I've been a Gunner believer all season long. I've really thought Gunner was the guy last year, ending the season, coming into the offseason. I said Gunner's the guy. Even when we allowed Carson to start, I was pulling for Gunner. I've been a huge Gunner believer. I think Tennessee, he's kind of showed the world that he can win the games. He can put the ball where it needs to be put to win the game. He can use his legs to keep the game in hand. So I think it's going to be a similar thing. They're going to have to utilize that running game, rotate the backs in and out. I think that running game has to open up a little bit more. I don't like how condensed it is. They need a little bit more explosiveness out of their running backs. Receiver-wise, they're great. I mean, this is probably the best group of receivers we had. You know, last year was probably the only year we didn't have Brock and Ladd. But this has been a really good group of receivers. Tight ends. Overall, you know, Branch, Humphreys. I think we are having a true year out of those guys. And if Gunner can just come to play like he did against Tennessee, I'm not riding against Georgia. Georgia's going to win this game by at least 3. So, you've heard it here. I have Arizona over Iowa State, Oregon over Penn State, and Georgia over Bama. I hope y'all enjoyed today's college football action. Like always, like, subscribe, hit my socials, and let's enjoy some football.